The following is a text exchange which occurred between brothers on June 15th, 2021, 11:11 a.m.
Because of some weird interpretations of laws and the actual border of Yellowstone, there appears to be a portion of Idaho where major crimes can't be prosecuted. Did you already know that? It is known as both Loophole Land and Zone of Death, apparently.
I've always thought it strange that the park border doesn't align with the state borders, but I never thought much about it.
The gist is, if you commit a major crime, such as murder, then you have to be prosecuted for your crime in the state where it was committed. Fine, that's Idaho. But the jury must be pulled from people living in the district. No one lives in that district, so no jury equals no trial. The Montana portion has 40 residents, so technically, a jury could be called, although that is a pretty small pool of jurors.
Oh, I wondered how Montana was different.
Unrelated, there was also a patch of land nearby called Lost Dakota, because it was not officially part of any state until it was officially moved into Montana.
Interesting. It seems like if it was close to the Idaho and Montana borders of Yellowstone, it was not particularly close to anything resembling the modern Dakotas geographically, but I'm guessing it has something to do with the original Dakota territory or the Native Americans.
Maybe.
Lost Dakota is also a band.
As it should be. Lieutenant Dan's New Legs is a local band.
Solid. Straight from the heartland, this is Things I Text My Brother. Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of Things I Text My Brother, a series of conversations which have taken place between the brothers Drouillard on subjects spanning the neighborhood and the globe, which will hopefully leave you smarter, kinder, and better looking. Today we're going to jump off from that dramatic reading that you just heard and discuss the topics therein. Maybe we'll talk about loophole lands, maybe we'll talk about Lost Dakotas, maybe we'll talk about criminals, death, juries, and Lieutenant Dan's New Legs. But we haven't plotted an exact course because we want you to join us on that journey. That's how it works on Things I Text My Brother. I'm Jeff. This is Brad. Let's talk about our texts. But before we get lost within mysterious territories of the frontier, we need to take a look back, because it's always important to make time to cleanse ourselves of our past sins and to continue our boundless quest for self-improvement through worthless information. And thus, it's time for ablutions and edification. Well, as I often get to say these days, Brother Brad, we didn't make any mistakes that anybody has informed us about. So we're going to jump straight on to that part where we get to improve ourselves through learning. That's the part of ablutions and edification known as edification. And you're going to start us out. What do you got?
Well, thinking back to our episode where we talked about Viking boat tours, which are a version of duck boat tours, we had talked about the fact that they're known to be deadly. And we talked about a series of deaths near Branson on a duck boat tour. And as it so happens, last week they charged 3 members of the crew of that duck boat tour on Table Rock Lake near Branson with 17 counts of involuntary manslaughter for the 17 deaths that occurred on that trip. They ignored the signs and the warnings of thunderstorms and bad weather to make $900 on the trip, and 17 people died.
Oh my gosh.
The trauma of the duck boat industry continues.
Oh my goodness. Well, you mentioned something that occurred on Table Rock Lake, and that actually brings me back to the last episode where we were talking about a Belgian border incident related to a stone being moved, and also mentioning a village in France called Busigny-sur-Roc. And we were actually chatting about whether the ROC, Roc, on Busigny-sur-Roc, means rock. So I looked into it today, and I found an article that was actually released just about a month before our conversation, where a woman named Camille Chevalier-Carfi addressed that very question. And she says, une pierre is the general term used for a rock or stone. She also says that another word for a small rock is le caillou. And apparently, with that bald-headed kid on TV, he's called caillou because his head looks like a pebble.
I did not know that.
Well, and as long as Camille Chevalier-Carfi is to be trusted, now you know. Another word she mentioned is le rocher, which is a boulder. La roche, which is the geological term for stone, as she says it. The word roc, R-O-C, the one that was in the town name that generated this whole line of thought, was me thinking, does Busigny-sur-Roc mean rock? Well, she says that The word le roc usually refers to a sharp stone or peak of some sort. So maybe Bugigny-sur-Roc has that type of rock, a sharp stone peak or something like that. But once I was done looking at all those types of French rocks or stone, I actually wanted to look into things back on our side of things, and I found the Wentworth Scale, which is a grade scale for the diameters of sediments. So basically, it leaves rocks and stones out of this because that's not a geological term in terms of grading the size of sediment. But the Wentworth Scale does exactly that. So at the bottom, the smallest part, 1/256th of a millimeter, you find clay. Then it works its way up through very fine silt and medium silt and coarse silt to fine sand, all the way up through coarse sand. And then once you get bigger than sand, you end up with granules and then pebbles and then cobbles and then boulders, which are greater than 256 millimeters. So not only have we learned all the French words for rocks, we've actually learned our words as well. Don't you feel informed?
I feel you're remiss in not placing the rock somewhere on this scale.
I don't know where the rock would be. He's probably much more massive than 256 millimeters. He's probably like 8 billion millimeters because of his exercise and diet regimen.
I've never really learned what millimeters are anyway, so.
No, for our American audience, this whole thing was pointless. So let's move on. Well, Brad, with another wonderful segment of ablutions and edification out of the way, now it's time to talk about all those things we mentioned in our text message a few minutes ago. So, as always, you're going to start us off. Where are we headed?
I want to start with the Yellowstone Zone of Death, or Loophole Land.
That's a very ominous name.
It begs the question of, it's not really about how to get away with murder, but where to get away with murder.
Ooh, I like that.
And in theory, you could get away with a major violent crime in this zone of death, this sliver of land in Idaho that is really part of Yellowstone. And so by serious crime, we mean any offense that would result in over 6 months of a jail sentence and require a jury.
Okay.
So it's not your misdemeanors and other things like that don't require a jury, because this only applies to things where there would be a jury.
Got it.
I looked at this, when I read it, I thought, there's no way that this is true, and it probably really isn't true. However, Brian Kaut, a law professor from Michigan State University who studies weird laws and loopholes as a hobby, and maybe as a profession too, but at least as a hobby, and looks for opportunities to improve the law code.
Yeah.
Found this. And it's based on the Sixth Amendment, where the Sixth Amendment says that as Americans, we have a right to a jury of our peers if we have a trial. And so there's this 50 square mile area of Yellowstone that's in Idaho, because Yellowstone existed before Idaho and Wyoming and Montana were states.
Sure.
So when they carved it up, they just carved this little weird piece off, and for whatever reason, they didn't really think it was going to cause a problem. But there are 0 people living in this sliver of Idaho, and no people equals no jury equals no trial, a violation of the Constitution. And so this was all in theory. He found this out in the early 2000s. And he tried to get it closed. He reached out to his senator. He reached out to the Department of Justice and got no response. A guy wrote a book based on this theory because he saw a constitutional law article that this Brian Kaut wrote, and wrote a murder book about a murder being committed here and not being able to be prosecuted. It was all about this guy who intentionally went out and just killed somebody there just for the fun of it, I guess, just to see a man die in Reno.
All right, Johnny Cash.
But that's all theoretical, right? All very esoteric.
Yeah.
But then in 2007, Mike Belderain killed an elk outside of elk hunting season. He knew he was in Yellowstone, which made it illegal, but it was the biggest elk he ever came across, and he was going to shoot it no matter what. Said if he'd have been in the heart of Yellowstone, he'd have killed it. Didn't matter. But then he realized immediately that he had made a bad decision. And it took a year, but they finally tracked him down, and they were prosecuting him for killing this elk. His time in jail was going to be 7 years for this crime.
Oh, wow.
So they tried to so it was a jury trial, and they were trying to use the loophole land defense. And the judge is like, yeah, I mean, that's an esoteric argument, but I'm not going to let you get away with that. But before they could really take it anywhere, Mr. Belderain pleaded down for a reduced sentence, which ended up being 4 years.
Oh, wow.
So he pleaded down about half the sentence. But part of his plea deal was that he was not allowed to pursue the loophole land defense in the future. So he couldn't go through. So really, there's no resolution to that? Is it really a violation of the Constitution? Could somebody get away with murder? We don't actually know the answer. We had an opportunity to know the answer, and it didn't happen. And then the Department of Justice did nothing to close the loophole even after that trial.
I had read that Mr. Belderain was in the Montana section, so technically that's an area where they could have formed a jury. I was wondering why they didn't bother. Certainly down in the Idaho section, there wouldn't have been a jury in the state, but I don't quite understand why they didn't try up in the Montana part.
The best part of all of it is he never really said he didn't do it, and he, to this day, says he deserved to go to jail. He committed the crime. He's never really tried to deny it. He just tried to get off on a technicality.
Well, if you had a chance to go to a lawless land, whether it was the loophole or elsewhere, and commit a crime, what crime would you choose to commit?
I have a guilty conscience, so I don't know that I'd commit much of any crime. I have been known to be inclined to petty theft every now and then. When I was a small child, if I walked home from school to our house, which, mind you, was 4 houses away, right? 5 houses away. If there was something laying between the sidewalk and the street, I figured nobody wanted it, so it was mine. So I would pick it up and take it home. And then Mom would always make me return it. It took me a long time to understand that just because it was laying outside didn't mean they didn't want it.
I didn't know about this period of time in your life where you were stealing stuff from our neighbors. No wonder you had such a bad reputation in the neighborhood.
I know. Oh, well, when I was in 1st grade, a kid tried to stab me with a pocket knife, cut my winter coat. So I ran with a rough crowd.
You stabbed me with a pencil in my hand, and that piece of pencil lead is still in my hand. I'm looking at it right now. Can't get it out of there.
I'm fairly certain you deserved it.
Yeah, and I also might have done it to myself. I don't actually recall how it happened.
What about you? What crime would you choose to commit?
I'm pretty sure I would run a slushy machine without a permit. Is that not the answer you were expecting?
I mean, I have no response for that, really.
Well, the thing about that is I could probably buy an industrial grade slushy machine and do it at some point in my life. But if I wanted to, sell those slushies and do this professionally, I'm sure there would be some permitting involved, and I just hate red tape. So if I could run an industrial slushy machine out of Loophole land in Idaho, I mean, that sounds perfect because nobody's going to prosecute me. And even if they try, I would give them a slushie.
Who's going to be mad about getting a free slushie?
Exactly.
The problem is you're going to have to take a generator with you, and the generator is what's going to really get you in trouble because there's probably not a lot of electricity running through no people living loophole land in Idaho.
Well, Brad, didn't you know that in the future, all industrial slushie making machines will operate on solar power?
Well, are we going to have any choice?
See, exactly what I'm saying. So maybe I'll wait until I get some solar panels and an industrial slushie machine, and I'll head out to Loophole land. And then if they take me to court, I'll win.
Is there a specific brand of slushie that you'd be working on? Is it going to be Hush Puppies? Oh, no, not Hush Puppies. Slush Puppy. Hush Puppy slushies would be terrible.
Yeah, definitely not Hush Puppy brand. So it would obviously be Slush Puppies. You and I know that that's what we grew up with. I've definitely consumed many other slush products over the years, and I generally enjoy all of them unless I happen to choose the wrong flavor or something. But the Slush Puppy is kind of an acquired taste amongst slushy drinkers because it is a lot more liquid than a lot of the other slushies. And I absolutely love it. That's how I want all my slushies to be. I even let other ones melt so they can try and get a little bit closer to the Slush Puppy that we had in our youth. For those of you who have only experienced modern Slush Puppies where it all comes out pre-made in usually red or blue, and yes, flavors for fruity drinks are the color, not whatever flavor they tell you.
That's a fact.
That is a fact. Everybody should know that. So these days you basically end up with red or blue if you're buying from a Slush Puppy machine and the flavoring is pre-mixed. In our day, the machine would spit out just the liquid and ice, and then there were probably, 6 flavors or 8 flavors or something like that. And you had to choose which one or ones because, of course, everybody wanted to mix and match. So you got extra squirts depending on how much extra money. I think it was like 5 cents for an extra squirt or something, if I remember. But I could be wrong on that. And Sister Angie was probably paying for most of mine anyway when she would be in charge of us and just take me there to shut me up.
To continue my petty thievery discussion, you were mostly paying for my Slush Puppies, even though you didn't know it.
What?
Because I did rob I robbed your bank a few times for the Portage River Festival so I could buy Snap Pops things, the little things you throw on the ground and they explode, and to buy Slush Puppies.
Well, the record has always been about how badly I treated you, but through like 10 episodes or 12 episodes or whatever we have of this show, I think the truth is coming out that I was basically a saint.
I mean, you can go with that. I was camping one time in the dunes in Michigan, and I took this, and it was summer, it was hot, and the dunes are hot because it's all sand. And I took this long hike thinking that it would connect back to the campground. It did not. And so I walked like a lot of miles, and I drank all my water thinking I was going to come back into the campground, but I had to go all the way back the way I came. Mm-hmm. And I came upon a snack building, and I had enough money for a gallon of water or for a small slush puppy. I chose the slush puppy, even though it might have resulted in my death because I didn't have enough hydration for the walk back.
That's right. When we're thirsty enough, we make poor choices. That's how I probably ended up with 12 different forms of Giardia-related diseases while walking through France and drinking from a stream that was running right between farms. I knew I shouldn't drink it, but I thought death might be the other option. So I would have made the same decision with the slush puppy because that'll keep you going.
Now they have those straws that you can take that you can just put it right in the river and it filters the water right while you drink it.
Yeah, I did not have one of those.
Well, you should have one of those. One thing I would like to educate our listeners on, if you want to be depressed, search for articles about legal loopholes. Like in Florida, if you are not legally allowed to purchase a firearm and you fill out a background check and you lie on said background check and say you are allowed to buy firearms, they can't prosecute you for lying on the form. They can deny you the gun when they figure out that you're not supposed to have one, but they can't prosecute you. So how many people who aren't supposed to have guns in Florida have gotten through on this loophole and been able to buy firearms they shouldn't have because they lied on the form because there's no risk?
It's a good question. Florida man lies on form. It happens.
Yeah.
I'm just glad that the non-native species of snakes, which are now totally overwhelming the Everglades, I'm glad that they have not brought guns because they're doing enough damage even without them. But I guess if they sign the paper, they can get one.
Fair enough. I'm also grateful on a regular basis that most spiders don't fly. Perhaps all of them.
Well, imagine flying spiders with guns. That sounds like a band name right there. So tell me about this other place. Loophole Land is not the same thing as the other area that we were mentioning called Lost Dakota, even though the two are very much in the same part of the world. So what do you know about this Lost Dakota place? How did it become lost and separated from all those other Dakotas? We got two other ones for we have millions of non-American listeners. We have a North Dakota and a South Dakota, and the Lost Dakota place was nowhere near either one. How did this happen?
Well, Lost Dakota, not even really related to Loophole Land at all, but when I was trying to figure out in that original text exchange if Loophole Land was actually a thing, or if I had just found one article that was just crazy, I ran across Lost Dakota. It was carved out of the Dakota Territory. Yes, you had it right. Well, your other guess was after Native Americans, and Dakota clearly is at least related to Native Americans, if not directly named after them.
Yeah, I nailed it on all fronts.
But this connects back to our previous episode where I informed everybody very clearly what an enclave is versus what an exclave is.
You sure did.
Lost Dakota was an exclave because it was surrounded by more than one other state. So it was surrounded by multiple states.
Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming, right?
Yep, Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana. So it was an exclave. It was about a third of the size of Manhattan.
Oh.
So not real large. It was just kind of hanging out there for a long time because they didn't know what to do with it.
So these days, Lost Dakota doesn't exist anymore. Now it's part of what? Montana, right?
Montana, yeah.
Well, that's very interesting. Was there any evidence of while this area was a lawless land, when it didn't really belong to anybody, did a bunch of criminals and bandits and everybody swarm there and produce slush puppies or anything?
I didn't find any petty crime or history of slush puppies, no.
Well, that's definitely a missed opportunity because there was this other area down basically now within the borders of what we know as Louisiana. But after we had made the Louisiana purchase from France, the Spanish had already been worried about the French encroaching on Texas from inside Louisiana. And then the American government took over. And so Spain and the United States government were at odds over this strip of land that basically is a big chunk of the western edge of Louisiana now. And so at some point, actually in 1806, they basically came up with a scenario where it would be a no man's land. They called it the neutral ground or the neutral strip. And not only could neither side claim it, they weren't allowed to put troops there and they weren't allowed to have their people settle it. And actually, when people started settling it from both sides, the United States government and the Spanish government, in the middle of that period of time, I think around 1812, if I recall, they actually sent in people. It was a joint military effort. They sent in people to remove all the people who had gone in there and claimed places. And there were lots of criminals, refugees, thieves, different people in there. So there was a neutral ground in which a lot of these crimes and things happened. But I guess Lost Dakota was just so isolated. Well, back then, certainly. But even today, there aren't any roads or anything in it, I don't think.
Yeah, it was way out there. Well, you did talk about Lost Dakota being a band.
Yes, I did. In fact, I think it's two different bands. I think there is a former band from up in Canada called the Lost Dakotas, and then I think there's a more recent band as well without the S on the end.
Well, I know there is a band called Dakota, like there's a band from Kansas called Kansas. I was trying to think if I actually knew any bands from South Dakota or North Dakota other than the band Dakota. And I know that Lawrence Welk's from North Dakota, and so they obviously should claim Lawrence Welk, because who wouldn't claim Lawrence Welk if they had the chance? And I'm pretty sure Wiz Khalifa's from North Dakota. He was born maybe where there's a military base, but I'm pretty sure Wiz Khalifa's from there. So I did a very rudimentary search on the most popular band from South Dakota and North Dakota, and I came across an article from the Sioux City, Iowa Journal.
Ooh, do tell.
That did from least popular to most popular. They picked one band from each state and then rated the state from least popular to most popular based on
I like it.
Their number of Spotify followers, their Wikipedia page views over the last 90 days, and this was in 2018, and the Wikipedia page views of the band's releases. That's going to rule out Lawrence Welk and some other folks because they're not really releasing new music. The lowest scoring state was Montana with a band called Silkworm, which I have never heard of. And then there was Maine, and then Wyoming. Then South Dakota had a band called The Spill Canvas. Never heard of them, but they're from Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage, The Spill Canvas.
Right, and one spot ahead of South Dakota was North Dakota, and it was Bobby V and the Strangers. So remember, this was based on Spotify followers, visits to their Wikipedia page, and Wikipedia hits for their most recent releases. Bobby V and the Strangers were in the 1960s.
Oh,
so they have no one in the popular lexicon at the moment, unless everybody listens to Bobby V and the Strangers on Spotify for some reason.
Well, as I went down the path of band names and things along those lines, because I did enjoy the name Lost Dakota, it had some good context to it, but I started just thinking about band names in general. So I ended up pursuing two different paths. And the first was just fun band names that I liked. And many of these are not for major bands. I saw lists of famous band names that were praised or criticized, but I also just saw a list of band names that actual groups had and were not necessarily mainstream or anything like that. From this list, I found one Detroit band called Dale Earnhardt Jr. Jr., which made me very happy. There was one called Cindy Brady's Lisp. There was another called Scoring Dope for the Ultimate Woman. I forget which website this was from, but the person who wrote the article said that they actually did release one respectable album in the 90s before they disappeared.
Define respectable.
Yeah, I like this band name, but I'm not sure how it would sound if you had to scream it into a crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome, congratulations on your decision to become a pilot.
That's the name of the band.
That's the name of the band. So I don't know what type of music they produced. Other names in rapid fashion that I enjoyed, I think these came off of a Rolling Stone article, but I could be wrong. There was the band Bat Wings, Cat Wings, which is creative. There was, of course, everybody's favorite planet, which is called Diarrhea Planet.
Diarrhea, cha-cha-cha.
Then right along the same lines, there's another band called Fart Barf, and that name is even better because it's joined as one word, Fart Barf.
I didn't need to know that.
There's a band called Someone Still Loves You, Boris Yeltsin.
Someone Still Loves You, Boris Yeltsin is a great name.
Yeah. One more. There was a band called We Were Promised Jetpacks.
Oh, and flying cars.
Exactly. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the stage. We Were Promised Jetpacks. And then, of course, there was one that I didn't find on today's search, but it would absolutely belong. There was once a band in the very late 90s, and before they changed their name in the early 2000s. There was a band from Detroit called the Juan Valdez Love Machine, which I commandeered at some point as my fantasy football team handle that I used for a long time. And I went back, apparently the Juan Valdez Love Machine, they apparently switched at some point to, I think, Love Machine Blue, as in the color. I'm not sure. Some of their songs were entitled Cauliflower Love, Butt Song, Baked, and I think that's about it. That's interesting. But it gives you a little bit of an idea of who this band was, the Juan Valdez Love Machine, which whether they were a good band or not, I have no idea. I just found their name and I liked it. But it was the best fantasy football team name that I've ever had. So I'm a believer in that as a solid band title. And you can absolutely announce them coming onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, the Juan Valdez Love Machine. And the crowd goes wild.
Did you happen to find any bands named after Tallulah Does the Hula from Hawaii or Number 16 Bus Shelter?
No, but I think that's coming. Both of those should be band names. But I did find another article. This one did come out of Rolling Stones. The 25 worst original names of bands that actually are famous.
Well, the Mookie Blaylocks. The Mookie Blaylocks.
Yeah, that was one that I knew, and I didn't think that one should come up on a worst of list because Pearl Jam, the Mookie Blaylocks.
Because I love it. I wish they would have stayed with the Mookie Blaylocks.
It's a great name, but I guess maybe Mookie Blaylock, the person, would call you on that.
Yeah,
but some of the other bands, I'm not going to read the list of 25, but a few of them that I enjoyed their original names and even their origin stories on a couple of them. Well, there's one that is particularly near and dear to the hearts of us as Ohio natives. Bones, Thugs, and Harmony. Well, that wasn't their original name. Apparently, at some point, Crazy Bone crashed his moped when they were young, and he came to school covered in bandages, and so did the rest of the band in solidarity. So the original name for Bones, Thugs, and Harmony, according to this list from Rolling Stone, was the Band-Aid Boys.
Oh, Bone Thugs and Harmony is much better.
Yep, Bones, Thugs, and Harmony is much better because especially you could sing bone, 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 and you couldn't really do that with exactly, and you can't do that. What are you gonna say? Band-Aid, 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 Band-Aid. What you gonna? It just doesn't work.
You ain't got no place to run.
Kiss, by the way, at least a couple of the members of Kiss were originally in a band called Wicked Lester, which I don't know what that means, but I enjoy the name Wicked Lester. Sugar Ray, Mark McGrath's band, was apparently called the Shrinky Dinks, but the Shrinky Dinks are those little toys that expand in water, and they are a trademarked item. So Milton Bradley didn't enjoy the band name of the Shrinky Dinks, so when they signed their big contract, they switched it over to Sugar Ray, which was in honor of the boxer, Sugar Ray Robinson at the time. And then my favorite one, because it is particularly bad, and yet the band name that is particularly bad was probably the name that this band should have gone with. You know the band Creed, right?
Yes, I do know the band Creed.
And Scott Stapp, and that is the band that has taken as much crap as any band maybe this side of Nickelback. So they've got that going for them. But apparently the guitarist, a guy named Mark Tremonti, according to this article, presented a newspaper clipping to his bandmates that he thought would be a good moniker. So he was carrying this name around in his wallet or whatever, and he proposed that Creed be called Naked Toddler.
That is wrong on so many levels.
And it's especially wrong because the guy was walking around carrying that name, like not just a spur of the moment thing. Like he was walking around thinking, this is the name. We've got to be Naked Toddler.
That would have been a really, really poor life decision on so many levels.
Yeah. Well, that was pretty much everything I delved into in terms of bands. But I did have a fun time looking down the list. There are obviously countless hundreds and thousands of band names, and there are a lot of them that could have easily been put on my list, but I did enjoy all the ones that I read off, except for the name Naked Toddler. But, I mean, we have to own our history. So, Creed, that's who you are, or at least that's who you were.
There's one thing I wanted to ask you. So, I took a trip down Weird Law Lane. And there's enough stuff out there about weird laws. I'm not going to really spend much time on it. But I did run across one weird law in the UK and one myth of a law of something that's legal in the UK. There's a law from 1986 in the UK called the Handling Salmon in Suspicious Circumstances Act.
Where is this?
In the UK.
Do they even have salmon in the UK?
Yeah. And it has evolved to become salmon and other fish. So apparently people would be doing these shady fish deals when they were illegally catching fish.
Yeah.
And I assume with Brexit it's even more important because they have even access to even less fish. But I like that the act is actually called handling salmon in suspicious circumstances. And but then I also ran across a myth. Apparently it's a myth that a lot of people in the UK might have believed at one point, that pregnant women are allowed to relieve themselves in police helmets if they have to go while on the street.
How would that...
Why specifically police helmets, and how many of them are there out there?
I don't even have the question for that one. Well, Brother Brad, there's one person we haven't heard from in this episode. To my knowledge, he's never been in a band, nor has he ever lived in a mysterious frontier land. But he is our Father Art, and we are going to ask him some questions.
If somebody lost a Dakota and put you in charge of finding it, where would you look first?
South Dakota.
You think they're most likely to steal the Dakota?
Yes.
If you were to start a band and were required for legal reasons to name it after something geographical, what name would you choose, and who would be in your band?
Well, I think I would call them Knockemstiff, and I think I would only allow guys who were 6'5" or bigger.
You're going to have a tall band?
Tall one.
Yeah.
So they could knock them stiff.
I got you. No problem. So big and tall, not just tall.
Yeah.
You need Ethans and Charlies.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, not Brads. Given your charm and intellect, would it even be possible to form a jury of your peers?
Well, sure. There's lots of weird people like me.
Well, folks, now that we've heard from Father Art, it means that our time together is coming to an end for this episode. We've said just about everything that we can say about Zones of Death, Lawrence Welk, bands called Naked Toddler, and bands called Diarrhea Planet. But fear not, as soon as we can dig back into the archives and find another gem of a text exchange, we'll have another episode coming your way. In the meantime, you can head over to our Instagram page at Things I Text My Brother Podcast to drop us a note about what you liked, what you didn't like, or to tell us about something that we got totally wrong. You might even have enough time to tell a friend, an enemy, and a total stranger to give us a listen as well. If you manage to do any of that, the fraternity of Drouillards will be forever grateful. But most importantly, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, that's it for today.
That's good. I've run out of smart-ass things to say.
I don't think that's true.
Well, okay.